right, good morning. Again, thank you for joining us this morning. Looks like we have a great turnout. My name is Megan Steiner. I am a state lead for K-12 Human Capital Strategies, and today we'll be talking about a tool that colleagues at schools, LEAs can use to determine how they are or how they can effectively assign different staff to meet certain functions that are especially necessary during this school year, but can also be useful in future school years. So I'm going to paste again in the chat, for those of you who just joined us, a link to the tool. And in just a few minutes, we'll begin a video, or just a few moments, I should say, we'll begin a video where you'll also see that link. So if you don't have the chance to click on it right now, you will have the chance to do so again. I would encourage you to follow along with this Word document tool so that you can get a better sense of the tool that we'll be viewing in the video. The video is fairly brief, about 15 minutes, and after that, you will have the opportunity to submit questions using the Q&A tool. You can submit those during the video or after the video. And I will also be asking some questions of you, of our participants, about your observations or ideas of how colleagues in schools and LEAs could use this tool and what you've seen them doing so far. So we'll be doing that in the chat after the video ends. So thanks again very much for joining us this morning. And we'll begin that video now, which will be followed by our interactive section. Thank you.
Welcome. This is a webinar in the series Creating Equitable School Systems, a Roadmap for Education Leaders, in the topic of exploring and selecting instructional delivery scenarios. My name is Megan Steiner, and I'm excited to be discussing specifically the topic of strategic staff deployment for school year 2020 to 21 and for other school years beyond as well. This refers to a tool that is part of the Roadmap for Education Leaders developed by PDE. It's a set of actionable resources and tools designed for education leaders at the school level or LEA level. While the roadmap focuses on topics particular to school year 2020 to 21, the roadmap resources are also useful for schools and LEA leaders beyond the current school year. Now, you'll notice that there is a URL in the middle of this screen. I would greatly encourage participants to type the URL into your own browser so you can follow along, because I will be actually going to the tool that is linked from this URL and scrolling through it and discussing it, and it can be advantageous for you to do the same. So I'll give folks a moment if they wish to type that URL into their own browser. All right, so now we'll move on to the audience and purpose of the tool. You'll notice that the URL is still on this screen, so you can still type it in if you would like to. So the audience of this tool is school leaders such as principals, as well as other leaders such as directors of special education or of English for speakers of other languages, individuals who are in a position to determine what are some functions and roles that are needed this school year, perhaps that were not needed in previous school years, and who may be best to fill them? Or if folks are already filling those positions, who may be best to assist, or do any changes need to be made? Now, the purpose is to aggregate a list of one-time functions and ongoing roles particular to this school year, or that are especially important now. Although, as I mentioned before, it also mentions functions that are useful in school years after 2020 to 21. The tool suggests who in the school or LEA may be well suited for each role, sometimes links to existing resources for the role, and helps identify who is or ought to be responsible for each role in a school or LEA. In order to foster consistency across an LEA regarding who is doing which work. All of this can help meet the student goals of accelerating learning, supporting student social emotional wellness, and ensuring school connectedness. I'd also like to emphasize that this tool is asset-based. It involves considering all the staff in a school or in an LEA and what are their skills, their experience, their relationships with students and one another, and using that approach to consider who may be best for fulfilling different roles and functions in this school year. So with that, we're actually going to look at the tool now. If you have already opened it up, you can follow along. So here is the tool, Strategic Staff Deployment for School Year 2020 to 21. As I mentioned, it's focused on 3 goals for students, and that is how the document is organized around the goals of accelerating learning for all students, supporting social emotional wellness, and ensuring school connectedness, with the first being accelerating learning for all students. So we're going to walk through an example together. The first role under the topic of curriculum is identifying the most critical prerequisite content, knowledge, and skills for each subject area and grade level. Now, the next column is a list of suggestions. This is meant to be open-ended, to be adaptable, however it can be most useful for schools and LEAs. So it lists here a number of roles within a school or LEA who may be able to fulfill the role in the first column, but it's not exclusive to the folks in that list. The next column includes some resources, tools that can help leaders or individual staff members implement the role mentioned. For example, here an outside organization has a guide on how to help identify skills, content that are needed to accelerate learning, particularly in school year 2020 to 21. The final column is left blank so that leaders can fill in which staff members are performing this role or could be performing this role. And of course, they don't have to align with the suggestions earlier in this column of staff to consider for the role. So as we're looking through this, consider with the schools and LEAs that you work with, that you support, that you communicate with, how have they been fulfilling these functions? What staff have been doing it? How successfully have they been doing it? And how might you recommend that your colleagues in schools and LEAs use this tool? For another example, the next role is adjust scope and sequence for acceleration and remediation that teachers can use to fill gaps in learning. I want to point out here that while we have a few different staff positions suggested here, it's useful to include a variety of staff members. So not just the ESOL teachers, but those who specialize in ESOL and special education and other areas. On the next page, I'd like to really highlight an important area around diagnosing diverse learning needs, especially following spring 2020. We know that in the previous spring, students had different levels of access to learning, different experiences depending on where they were. And also this school year, due to some of the changes and particular issues, students may also be having various issues or successes with learning, and therefore it's especially useful that we are continuing to effectively diagnose students' learning needs. And it can be especially helpful to have a variety of staff members involved in this. I would also like to highlight on the next page the importance of these roles regarding virtual walkthroughs and frequent actionable feedback. Now, we know these are tasks that schools have long been engaged in, trying to improve, trying to do effectively, and it's especially important then that we be supporting schools and ensuring that they have staff members who are adapting these functions to a remote or hybrid learning environment or to whatever changes they're going through in this school year. Also would like to emphasize at the bottom of this page the importance of communicating with families to gather feedback about the school's approaches to blended or remote learning or to whatever changes the school is undergoing this year. Again, communicating with families, something schools have long been engaged in and succeeding in with a variety of approaches, but it's important to keep in mind to support schools in identifying who can best be doing this communication given the particular issues and changes this school year. The next overarching goal that these roles can help meet is supporting students' social emotional wellness. So we have, for example, the need to facilitate collaboration among staff to better meet the needs of students who have acute social emotional and/or academic needs. This is something, this collaboration, that may be a bit more difficult if a school has a different schedule this year or is fully or partially remote, and why it can be especially useful to encourage schools to identify who is in charge of that facilitation and ensuring that it is ongoing despite the changes this school year. Also providing professional learning for educators on meeting social emotional needs, particularly through trauma-informed practice. This is, of course, something schools have also been working hard on over time, but that can be particularly necessary, to think of through the lens of how do we approach this and prepare teachers to do this when learning is remote, hybrid, or due to other challenges, which brings us to professional learning on addressing the stressors and challenges that may occur this school year, whether it be regarding health risks, wearing masks, learning remotely, and so forth. And you'll notice that in this section, it is heavily associated with the positions of school counselors, social workers, and psychologists. These are the folks who are often associated with meeting students' social emotional needs, but of course we know that other staff can also play a role. For example, we see here that librarians are folks to consider who may be able to help curate resources, learning materials to help educators meet these needs of students. Finally, we have this overarching goal of ensuring school connectedness. So what does school connectedness mean? Well, students feel connected to school by believing that people at school care about them as students and as individuals. And this school connectedness is associated with positive academic, health, and personal outcomes. As you may guess, school connectedness can be a bit harder to ensure when school is remote or when there are other challenges going on and that require changes in school. So I want to look at this first role here, checking in regularly with all students. It's recommended not just for the students who are struggling the most or who are frequently absent, but with all students, especially when school is remote or hybrid, so that each student is assigned to a staff member who can conduct these check-in calls. And if you are discussing this topic with a school or LEA, it is useful to bear in mind and to remind them that you can view the whole school staff as really a team that can collaborate here. This is an asset-based approach, and you're thinking about any school staff who have a connection with a student, from the obvious like teachers and paraprofessionals, through coaches, support staff, anyone who has that connection with a student who could call, text, communicate with whatever language is relevant for that student or family. Now, I've talked about how all school staff, the whole school team, can play a role. But we haven't gotten to really the stars of this team, the ones that we are all focused on, which are the students. So this final page refers to potential roles for students to play in ensuring school connectedness. Now, these are not necessary. These are potential ideals for schools to consider if these roles would benefit students and if they have students ready and willing to do so. So these are roles that students could take on to boost their own social emotional wellness, their own school connectedness, and benefit the school community. So these are just suggestions that you might consider. And you can also think about, do you know schools that are remote or hybrid or dealing with other changes this school year that have found new ways to involve students and improve their school connectedness? So with that, we're going to go back to our slide deck. And this is the thank you for your time slide. Thank you for your time and participation. If you were following along, or if not, you can always access the roadmap tools, this one and others. You can refer your colleagues at schools and LEAs to these tools. If you have any questions, ideas, or suggestions, I would love to hear them. If your colleagues at schools and LEAs do, they can also contact me. My email is on this slide. If you do have any questions or ideas, I would look forward to hearing them. Thank you again for your time, and have a great day.
All right, this is Megan again. So even though the video just said goodbye and thank you, that was the video that will eventually be posted as a standalone item on the PDE website. But since this is the live webinar, now we have time. I will be asking some questions of you, and you can continue to ask us questions. So if you can remember to do so, if you have questions for me or for us, you can type them into the Q&A. However, I know this is a little complicated. If you have responses or ideas in response to the questions that I ask, we ask that you type those responses into the chat, because that way everyone can actually see your responses. So, as you viewed that video, as you may have the Word document open right now, and perhaps you've been going through it, I would love to know if you'd like to type into the chat, with schools and LEAs that you are involved with, what are some ways you have seen them leveraging various staff members and their skills to meet challenges and changes that have arisen this school year? For example, have you seen any schools using some of the staff members suggested in this tool in a way that allows them to meet some of these functions? Or do you have any suggestions for how the schools and LEAs you work with could begin to or continue to use some staff members to meet those functions? So if you have any feedback or ideas in response to that question, I'll give a moment to type it into the chat. And not only will we see your responses, but your colleagues will also see your responses, and that might generate some ideas for them. And I will post again a link. And just to reiterate, the link opens a download of a Word document. So it will not open a web page, but it will trigger the download of a Word document, because that is the form this tool is in. So while you might be thinking about that first question, oh, okay, this is interesting. So Kelly responded, thank you, about the adult connection, the connectedness to school. That's a good example of literally using strategic staffing, of assigning staff in a certain way to ensure school connectedness. Does anyone have any other examples, either of that school connectedness piece, maintaining the connection of students and as individuals to school and to school staff, or of other ways that schools or LEAs that you are involved with have been creative and strategic in assigning certain roles and tasks to staff to meet the challenges and changes of this school year? Or does this tool we've just gone through raise any ideas for you on what you might suggest to your colleagues in schools and LEAs that might help them address some changes that we're facing this year? So we have another response emphasizing the importance of cooperating with teachers and ensuring flexibility. The video did mention this as an asset-based approach, looking at the opportunities to build on all staff members' strengths and experiences. And I think that aligns well with the point that a participant just made about cooperating with teachers, with collective bargaining units, and so forth, in encouraging flexibility to meet the challenges of this year. And for those of you who are not already doing so, you can of course look at the chat and see what other people are typing in. Other people are also having some interesting ideas of what people are or could be doing as well to leverage staff to address changes in particular issues this school year. Now, this video and this tool talk mostly about the staff in the school building. So I'd invite you to weigh in with any ideas about how LEAs might deploy the skills of central office staff or other leaders in creative or non-traditional ways to help meet the changes and challenges of this school year. So we've talked about the roles of school building staff, but do you have any observations or ideas about how central office staff could be strategically assigned in their roles to improve the meeting of needs of students in this school year? Oh, and Brad had a good question about paraprofessionals. So this tool did mention paraprofessionals, but not very frequently. If you do go to the roadmap that PDE, the roadmap page that PDE has provided, and I'll post that link in just a moment, there is another document also under the strategic staffing umbrella that is about a particular model of assigning teachers and paraprofessionals to tasks that can be used either in person or remotely. So for anyone who's looking for some additional ideas and examples of how paraprofessionals can be involved remotely, I will also paste a link that allows you to reach both the tool we just discussed and another web page that gives ideas for both teachers and paraprofessionals. Give me just a moment and I will pull that up. Although it looks like someone already put it in there. Awesome. Okay. So I wanted to throw out another question there about student engagement and school connectedness. Often when we think about school connectedness, when learning is remote or hybrid, we tend to think about students who are absent either for a day or for a class, and the array of issues that may be causing that. But I also mentioned in the video how school connectedness is important for all students. Do you have any ideas or suggestions or observations of how schools and LEAs are or could be improving school connectedness for students? So someone had mentioned earlier a way of staffing roots classrooms for students to have more connectedness with an individual teacher. Have you observed anything else of how schools and LEAs are improving school connectedness? This could include remote extracurricular opportunities, or opportunities for students to communicate with one another outside the classroom, things like that. Oh, okay. I like Janine's response there about paraprofessionals. Thank you. That's a great example of meeting an array of student needs. as a paraprofessional by helping students who have particular needs, and especially perhaps if they're in a remote or hybrid learning situation. Oh, the Remind app, I've heard of that. Yeah, different ways to use technology to encourage and praise students for the ways they are involved in class and submitting assignments and meeting deadlines and so forth. So, and continue to, by all means, type in some answers to any previous questions, but I also wanted to know, have you had any observations of how schools are leveraging special education and English for speakers of other languages teachers, either in collaboration with other staff or on their own? What are some ways that those staff members have been strategically assigned to tasks for this school year? Okay, so Catherine responded about ESOL teachers connecting with families of English learners. WhatsApp, also a great example of using technology to do this. Yeah, I've certainly heard examples of ESOL staff sometimes being the folks who are deployed to reach out to families of English learners and maintain that school connectedness. And finally, we can also think about other staff, non-instructional staff, such as librarians, counselors, school psychologists, school social workers. What are ways that you either have seen schools leveraging the experiences and skills of these individuals this year? Or do you have any ideas for what the schools you work with could be doing to further build on and assign these folks and their skills to meet the needs of students this year? So Lori mentioned about co-teaching and serving as a collaborative team to support all learners with the MTSS framework. Awesome. So that, yeah, that addresses social emotional needs, academic needs, a variety of needs. And I've certainly seen a lot of information out there about the school year about that collaborative piece being key. Collaboration both among teachers who would normally be collaborating, like a special educator and a subject teacher who share students, and also perhaps among folks who aren't collaborating normally but need to do so a little bit more this school year. Oh, outside organizations, that is an awesome example. Yes, community organizations like local churches to help out the school community. Katrina mentioned check and connect. I haven't heard of that. Katrina, if you want to type in a little bit more about that, or if there's a link for us to learn more about it, that would be great to build and maintain student relationships. So I don't know if that's a procedure or a technology or maybe both, but that sounds potentially quite useful. Oh, so someone asked also a question about, will we have access to the chat questions and response comments after the session? So I will ask if one of our colleagues from PaTTAN could perhaps type a response into the chat to let us know about whether folks will be able to see the questions and responses from the chat box afterwards, because I actually not being the technology person with all the answers right now, I'd also like to know the answer to that. Yes. Okay. Sarah says we can share the transcript with the recording. Okay. Awesome. Good to know. Thank you. That was a great question for the participant who asked about that, because I know people are having some good ideas and suggestions here that folks would want to refer to later. And Nicole, thank you for pasting the information about Check and Connect. I am going to want to look that up later as well. That sounds great. So I have one final question to throw out there. And again, if you have any other ideas, questions, suggestions, you can keep them coming. But finally, we'd just be interested to know, now that you've seen the tool on the video and or perusing it yourself as a Word document, do you have any ideas of how you might either refer colleagues in schools and LEAs to this tool, or how you might introduce them to it, how you might, who you might suggest uses it among your colleagues? So if you have any ideas about, okay, now I know what this thing is, here's what I might do with it next, as far as my colleagues in schools and LEAs. If you have any thoughts about that, we'd also like to see them in the chat. And I will add again the link to the tool. I will paste that into the chat box again. And a reminder, this will open a Word document as a download. It will not open a whole new web page. It's also available at any time in the roadmap page, which I know one of my colleagues pasted in here before. Personally, I navigate by typing in PDE roadmap into Google. That is how I come across it. And within that roadmap, then there are different categories, and this is under the instructional category. Okay, so Lori said could use this as part of the discussion when planning with schools and improvement to guide specific discussions aligned to their goals. Lori, thank you for mentioning that aligned to their goals piece. That is another important thing. I'm glad you used that phrase in particular, because it points out how these are things that some are continuations of ongoing work at schools, some are new functions that are particular to this school year. But it is important that they be aligning with the existing goals for students that schools already have. So those are all the questions I really had for all of you today. But I will certainly hang around for a few more minutes. If anyone has any more questions they'd like to submit to the Q&A, or any more ideas, suggestions they'd like to enter into the chat, please go ahead and do so. And thanks so much for your participation today. And thank you to everyone who was sharing ideas, questions, suggestions, and so forth. That really helped make this session more useful for all of your fellow participants as well. So we had a question, when will the videos be posted? If Sarah or someone else wants to respond to that question, I will pass it over to someone who is more knowledgeable about that. Hopefully within the week. Okay, awesome, thank you. That's the answer to the question, when will this be posted? Awesome, thanks to everyone for participating. Again, I will be here for a few more minutes, certainly, until such a time as it seems like we don't have any more questions or comments. If you feel like you have shared all your questions and comments, you are done, feel free to move on with your day. But thank you so much for your participation, and have a great rest of your Tuesday. All right, so with that, it seems like we don't have any more questions, so I'll close out. I'm going to type into the chat one more time my own email address. And it will also be available, it will be posted at the end of that video that will be on the website within the week, we hope. But just if you want to copy and paste it to have on your own just for the time being. If you have any more questions, ideas, suggestions, I would love to hear from you at my email address as well. So thanks again, and we will close out. Have a great day.